Oh, hey, howdy, hi. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to join me today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie, and I'm a witch, and this over here is my teaching assistant, Andy, and today is Tuesday, and on my channel that means it is tea time and true crime. Today's true crime case is going to be the assassination of Lincoln, as well as the Booth conspiracy. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. A couple of quick trigger warnings for this video are going to be murder, assassination, and then conspiracy theories surrounding said murder. So to start, I want to know genuinely what you were taught about in school in regards to Lincoln and the assassination. I remember a lot of focus on his freeing of the slaves and his work surrounding those topics. The important part, of course. I knew that he was shot in the head in the theater by an actor who then fled. I knew the guy's name was John Wilkes Booth. But that is where the education ended, which is fair. I mean, to a degree. I am glad that they don't teach conspiracies to students. It makes one curious, though. What led up to the assassination? What was the motive? How did he get away after shooting the president? What happened after he was found again? Well, let me try to the best of my ability to tell you what really happened. Let's start with Booth. He was born in Maryland, coming from a long line of successful actors, which he became in his own right. During his life, he was an outspoken Confederate sympathizer and later member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Before we get to the whole kidnap plot, we first have to try to explain a key point during the Civil War, and that was the prisoner exchanges. I will explain this as best I can, but understand that I do not think I fully understand it myself, so if anyone can correct me or add info in the comments, I would greatly appreciate that. Anyways, prisoner exchanges kept POW counts low as they would be released. The caveat was that anyone released was not allowed to rejoin the military. The problem was that white and black soldiers were being held to different standards as humans. Black POWs were not considered POWs, but instead the Confederates would use them as slaves. They were also allowing their released men to rejoin for their side. Lincoln issued General Order 252 to stop all prisoner exchanges between North and South until all of the Northern soldiers were exchanged regardless of their skin color. Booth created a plan to kidnap Lincoln in order to force the prisoner exchange to restart. He was able to recruit Samuel Arnold, George Asterdalt, David Harold, Michael O'Laughlin, Lewis Powell, and John Surratt. Now it is to note that Lincoln, while not knowing him personally, was a fan of Booth's acting. He even invited him to the White House, though he never attended. Booth did attend the second inauguration though, writing later, "What an excellent chance I had if I wished to kill the president on Inauguration Day." Back to the plot. The plan was to kidnap Lincoln as he returned from a play put on at Campbell General Hospital. Lincoln did not attend that play though, and instead attended a ceremony at the National Hotel, which is actually where Booth was living at the time. But since he was out, waiting near the hospital, he didn't get a chance to get Lincoln that night. In the meantime, the Confederacy was collapsing. Booth still believed in the cause though, and was going to fight for a way to salvage the Confederate ideals. His solution was to assassinate the president. Now there are so many speculations as to what the motive really was. In a letter he wrote to his mother, he said he wanted to avenge the South. Another theory was due to his rivalry he had with his brother Edwin, who was a Unionist. However, to that point, he seemed to be able to separate support for a cause from a person, as he apparently admired abolitionist John Brown. Booth attended Lincoln's last speech on April 11, 1865, where he promoted voting for the emancipation of slaves. Booth decided this would be Lincoln's last speech. He was so enraged he tried to get Powell to shoot Lincoln right then and there. It's unclear as to why he couldn't shoot him himself, but Powell refused as he feared the crowd's reaction. Lincoln himself was said to have predicted his own assassination 3 days before it happened. He dreamt that he walked into a funeral, but was unable to see who had died. So he started asking everyone who had died, to which he was told, the president. He was killed by an assassin. It isn't entirely strange he had this dream, though. There was a previous attempt on his life, but the bullet hit his hat. It was also said that in the month prior, he had seemed very worn down, but the morning of the assassination, he was in full health and spirits, telling everyone how happy he was. On April 14th, Booth went to Ford Theater, where he learned that Lincoln was attending Our American Cousin, and Booth was familiar with the theater, having performed there previously. This gave him the perfect opportunity to strike. Word was sent to conspirators to ready themselves. Powell was assigned to kill Secretary of State William H. Seward in his home. Atzerodt was to kill the Vice President Andrew Johnson at the Kirkwood Hotel. Harold was to be a guide for Powell, who was unfamiliar with Washington. Lincoln was advised against attending the play, but he felt he had to attend as it had been printed in the newspaper that he would. Mary and him enjoyed the play, and a line had even been changed for that performance. His last words are debated. Mary said that his last words were about him wanting to visit Jerusalem, while others believe his last words to be, "She won't think anything of it," which was in reply to something Mary had asked. Booth made his move. The president did not have his usual security, so Booth had an easier time. He barricaded the door to the hallway leading to the president's viewing box. He then crept into the viewing area, where he shot Lincoln behind the ear. Lincoln slumped over and fell backwards. Now, according to a witness, Booth simply shouted, "Freedom." Major Henry Rathbone, who had attended with Lincoln, tried to get the gun from Booth. He had been able to get Booth to drop the gun, but he pulled out a knife and stabbed Rathbone in the forearm. Rathbone did not give up, though. He grabbed Booth, who was preparing to jump to the stage 12 feet below. Booth was still able to jump, but due to how he landed, he injured his left foot. The audience thought that this was simply a part of the play, until Booth held up the bloody knife and shouted. What he shouted is not entirely known. The different versions are Sic Semper Tyrannis, Sic Semper, which is actually apparently what Booth claimed he said. The South is avenged, revenge for the South shall be free, or I have done it. Booth was immediately pursued, but he ran out a side door and was able to mount a getaway horse, getting away. Lincoln was not dead, though, and was being helped by Union Army surgeon Charles Leal. The bullet was removed, and with it a blood clot. This action helped Lincoln breathe a little better. 7 men then carried Lincoln from the theater to a house across from the theater, as a carriage ride was deemed too dangerous. 4 more doctors arrived at the house, but everyone agreed Lincoln would not survive. Lincoln died the following morning at 7:22. With his death, Vice President Andrew Johnson became the 17th President of the United States. At that same time, the other conspirators were following through with their targets as well. Powell was tasked with killing a man who, the night of the assassination, was confined to bed nursing injuries he sustained a week prior when he was thrown from his carriage. Powell made his way to the house with a revolver and a Bowie knife. He knocked on the door at 10:10 p.m., claiming to have medicine from Seward's doctor, and that the instruction said Powell needed to personally show Seward how to dose and take it. So he was allowed in and went upstairs to the bedroom. Now, once in the house, Seward's son, Frederick, was suspicious and tried to stop Powell, but Seward's daughter, Fanny, inadvertently told Powell which room was their father's. Powell tried to shoot Frederick, but the gun misfired, and instead he began to bludgeon him. He then ran into the room and started stabbing Seward in the face and neck. Powell was able to get out of the house unharmed. What he didn't know is that Seward survived with just some serious facial scarring. Atzerodt was staying at the Kirkwood house in the room directly above the vice president. He was supposed to execute the plan to execute the VP at 10:15. He went downstairs at that time and talked to the bartender, inquiring about Johnson's character. He ended up drunk and just left and wandered the streets. At some point he pitched his knife, then made his way to a hotel where he got a room and just went to sleep. The aftershocks of Lincoln's death were immense. The general consensus was that this was a great loss. The North and South alike were deeply saddened by the assassination. Lincoln's casket was viewed by hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom were brought by a special train specifically for the viewing. The poem "O Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman was written as a eulogy to Lincoln. The English Foreign Secretary, China's Chief Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Ecuadorian President, the Liberian government, and the Haitian government all expressed sympathies to the family and countries, and all expressed that they agreed it was a great loss. The next stop was Samuel Cox's house, and he took them to a Confederate sympathizer who hid them in the Zekiah swamp. The next stop was Samuel Cox's house, and he took them to a Confederate sympathizer who then hid them in Zekiah Swamp for 5 days. After those 5 days, the group crossed the Potomac to get to the farm of Richard H. Garrett in Virginia. Booth lied and told Garrett he was a wounded Confederate soldier. On April 26, soldiers from the 16th New York Cavalry arrived on the farm and surrounded the barn where the men were sleeping. Their threat to set fire to the barn scared Harold enough to surrender. Booth refused to be taken alive, though, so the soldiers set fire to the barn. Booth tried to get out the back door, but Sergeant Boston Corbett shot him in the head. Booth died on the porch of the house a few hours later. Now, initially Corbett was arrested because they wanted Booth brought in alive, however he was released and is generally considered a hero. Powell got lost as his guide abandoned him, but he made it to Mary Surratt's home where detectives were waiting. He claimed to be a ditch digger hired by the Surratts, but Mary denied knowing him and they were both arrested. Surratt was hiding out at his cousin's farm, but he was caught on April 20th. John Surratt was actually able to escape to Quebec, but he traveled around and was eventually caught in Egypt in November of 1866. All of the conspirators, which were not just the men who committed the act, but those who helped to hide or transport them, were all found guilty. Some were sentenced to several years in prison, but the majority were hanged for their part in the assassination. And that is the real story, the historical account of the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. So if that is why you are here, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope to see you in the next video. For those who are here for the conspiracy, let's begin. If you are interested in the book that actually helped me learn this conspiracy, this is it. This is available on Amazon, and I really like this book because it has removable documents, which I will be using. So I want to make it clear that the book does not dispute that he killed Lincoln or that he fled. This story starts in the barn in Virginia. Those who do not believe that Booth died in the barn think that he was helped by the Confederate Secret Service to escape and that a look-alike was in the barn to throw off the Union soldiers. Joanne Holm, a distant relative of Booth, claimed that as a little girl, her mother told her that Booth had managed to escape and that he didn't die for many years after. According to Lincoln assassination scholar Joan Chaconis, this is how she believes the barn incident went down. Union soldiers surrounded the barn. Harold started to panic and wanted to surrender. Booth said, "Okay," and booted Harold from the barn. Booth still refused to surrender though, so the soldiers set the barn on fire. Booth is shot and dragged out from the barn. Now, Harold saw this and began asking the soldiers who that man they shot in there was. Like, who was that? The soldiers just told him he obviously knew who it was, but Harold was insistent. "I don't know who that is. He said his name is Boyd. I really didn't know it was Booth." This whole interaction is weird because why would he lie? He was captured and he had nothing to gain by lying. Nathan Orlowick, Booth researcher, maintains that it is possible that the man killed was not Booth. 3 different witnesses said that the man dragged from the barn was a redhead while Booth had jet black hair. His personal doctor even said that the barn body had freckles and looked older than Booth. This Boyd person was a real person though. Captain James W. Boyd was a Confederate soldier in the 6th Tennessee Infantry. He ended up being a POW and was transferred to Washington under order of Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. But why did he want him returned to DC, you ask? He was a Union spy. What's weird is he does not exist in any government records after February 15th, 1865, 2 months before the assassination. If you look at a picture of Boyd and Booth, they look shockingly similar. According to Jan Herman, a naval historian who actually studied the autopsy report, Booth's body was taken from the farm to the USS Montauk for the autopsy. 13 people were present for the autopsy, all of whom were connected to either the War Department or the Naval Department. One of the 13 was a photographer, but the second he snapped a picture, it was confiscated and the negatives have disappeared over the years. What is weird is that the family was not allowed to see the body. The conspirators that had been arrested were also on board the Montauk, but none were asked to identify the body. Dr. John Frederick was asked to come and identify the body as he had been Booth's doctor, and he said that the body looked nothing like Booth, as he was older than Booth and had freckles. He was then pressured to just go along with identifying it as Booth, which he did to avoid being accused of being complicit in the assassination. When the autopsy itself was completed, a piece of cervical vertebrae and a small section of the spinal cord were taken. These are actually still around, residing in the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Maryland. Obviously, DNA would verify whether or not it is from Booth, but the courts have refused to allow the pieces to be typed. So if he didn't die, what happened to him? Historians agree that it is likely he took one of 3 aliases. He could have assumed the identity of Boyd, though there are no records of him after the assassination, or he used the alias John B. Wilkes and fled the country, or he moved to West Texas and lived under the name John St. Helen. Like James Boyd, John B. Wilkes was a real person. He lived in Indiana and was from England. Historian Chuck Hupert believes Booth took Wilkes's identity and moved to India, where he lived out the rest of his days. However, Hupert has also said that Booth returned to the US, where a picture of him was taken. He then went back to India, where he died in 1883. His proof is a will that John B. Wilkes executed. The will gave money to family and friends of John Wilkes Booth. $25,000 to Ogarita Rosalie Wilkes, daughter of Booth and his wife Isola Mills Darcy Booth. $25,000 to Mary Louise Turner, another daughter of Booth, but this one was a daughter of his mistress Emily Turner. And $1,000 a year to Henry Johnson, a freed slave who helped Booth escape after the assassination. The problem with the will is that it is not signed, so there is no verifying it was written by Booth, as they can't match signatures. John St. Helen is the other viable alias, so what's his story? M. Turner Chitty, daughter of historian Arthur Ben Chitty, has continued on with her father's research. According to Chitty, Booth went to Franklin County, Tennessee, where he fell in love with Louisa Payne. Booth told her that he had killed the president, to which Louisa just didn't care for some reason. What she did care about was the fact that Booth had married her under a fake name. She demanded they go back to the courthouse to be remarried using his real name. Thanks to this, we have a marriage certificate from February 24th, 1872, with John Wilkes Booth's signature. The niece of Louisa, Juanita Keel, said that this is a known family secret that St. Helen was actually Booth. According to her, the two moved to Memphis, but Louisa got homesick and moved back. Booth said he would join her shortly, but never came. Granddaughter of lawyer Phineas L. Bates believed that her grandfather was a confidant of Booth. St. Helen sent for Bates on his deathbed because he wanted to make a confession. And he told him everything. The assassination, how he escaped, everything. Apparently, he did not die though, and instead recovered and moved to Oklahoma, where he assumed a new identity, David E. George, which could have been a code since the co-conspirators were David Harold and George E. Atzerodt. In 1903, Bates saw an obituary for David E. George, and Bates recognized that as his friend, John St. Helen. So Bates went to identify the body, and sure enough, it was St. Helen. David E. George did not die a normal death, though. Instead, he committed suicide by drinking arsenic. The arsenic then mixed with the embalming fluids, and this mummified the body. Now, when Bates arrived, he was actually just given the mummified body because no one else had claimed it. He tried to sell it. At one point, he tried to sell it to Henry Ford for $1,000, but it ended up just sitting in storage until his death in 1923. His wife then sold the mummy to a traveling circus. So this is a crazy story for sure. One that can easily be laid to rest if we could just do DNA testing, right? Obviously, the spinal column has yet to be tested, so the family had petitioned the court to have the body exhumed. Initially, a judge granted the request, but then someone else appealed that decision, and the decision was sent to a different judge who actually approved the appeal. Apparently, they don't know where Booth was buried, and that there is evidence that 3 infant siblings of his had been buried on top of him in the grave. The judge also said that the body was out of ground for 15 days before the burial, so that apparently would affect the results. But also there is likely water damage to the plot, which would affect the results. But we don't even know where the plot is, apparently. At the end of the day, this is a really weird story, and kind of just up for whatever you guys believe. I don't know if I truly believe that John Wilkes Booth got away or if he died in the barn, but I think there is a lot of evidence going either way. Obviously, the official reports say that it was John Wilkes Booth, but there's a lot of people who say, there's evidence to the contrary, but at the same time, it was the 1800s and somebody could just say, oh, I'm John Wilkes Booth and sign a marriage certificate. I mean, supposedly he got married under a fake name and nobody knew, so it's not like it's like verified. So yeah, so that was that. I thought this was an interesting one. I debated whether or not to put it in true crime or my history series. I went with true crime because, assassination is murder, that's a crime, and so kind of fit there. But I think I will do a history video about the assassinations of presidents because Lincoln was the first. This was really interesting for me to learn about because obviously, he was assassinated in the theater because he freed slaves and a whole lot of weird stuff like that. And I think that's really important, but there's so much surrounding it that I had no idea. And Lincoln is by far my favorite president, and so the fact that I didn't know as much, I was just excited to learn more. So if I missed anything or you have anything to add or any facts about Lincoln, please put them in the comments. I would love to read those. Also tell me what you think about the conspiracy. Do you think Booth died in that barn, or do you think that he lived on afterwards? But let's see, other stuff other than this video. I don't know what's coming out next week. Actually, I lied, I do know what's coming out next week. I'm gonna be talking about centaurs and unicorns for legends and lore. I'm skipping Misheard History next week, and then on Tuesday I will be doing the next video in the Fatal Alignment series. I also have a schedule for my streams, which is going to be Fridays and Saturdays. You can check my Twitch for those times. I don't remember them off the top of my head. But there's that, and then I think Wednesday or Thursday every week I will upload at least one of the VODs, maybe 2 VODs a week, because I'm doing 2 streams a week. But yeah, I did just post the first VOD. It's the newest one before yesterday. And so that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm just gonna post them. The audio is a little bit wonky. I fixed that, so going forward, after I post the next 5 VODs, it'll be fixed. But yeah, if you wanted to check those out, or just play them at night if you really wanted to, you know, I'd appreciate the support. But I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye!